welcome, and as Chris indicated, he chose the topic of the asparagus family. And, you know, I could have structured this anyway, well, not anyway, but a number of different ways, including with the background sound of the passing train. But it's going to be part botany, part horticulture, part taxonomy. But because I need to talk both about botany and horticulture, I always like to point out the relationship between botany and horticulture, because the average person doesn't, well, the average person probably doesn't know the term horticulture. Most people know the term botany. And if they know both terms, they often don't know the relationship between botany and horticulture. Botany is a hard science. It's strictly the study of plants. Horticulture is a combination of science, art, and, you know, actual hands-on practice, the craft of growing plants. Now, botany is one of many sciences that informs horticulture. You know, the other science would be the various different chemistries and soil science. And, you know, you could also argue entomology, the study of insects. But obviously, botany, the study of plants, is one of the most important sciences when it comes to horticulture. And the classification of organisms is known as taxonomy. And in the classification of organisms, we have 7 different levels of classification, from the broadest, which would be kingdom. And the 2 most basic kingdoms are animals and plants. There's other kingdoms like fungus family. And I've been around long enough that when I was coming up, fungus were considered plants, and now they're in their own kingdom and are thought to be more closely related to animals than to plants. But I have digressed, as I excel in doing. But then the lower orders are phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So we're talking about a family. And family are made up of genera, genera being the plural of genus. And then a genus can be monotypic, meaning there's just one species in the genus, or there's many species in a genus. And I do want to point out, and this is another aside, that when we talk about the species name, we tend to think of the species name as this last thing, you know, the second part of the binomial, but actually the species name of an organism is the genus and the species, just like you and I have a first name and a last name, and our proper name is, you know, both of those together. The species name of an organism is the generic name and the specific epithet. So, you know, this is a common snake plant. The generic name is Sansevieria, unless I'm more up to date than that, but back to that in a while. And the specific epithet is Trifasciata. So the whole species name of this plant is Sansevieria trifasciata. So that's already a whole bunch of botany and taxonomy. But Chris chose the topic of the asparagus family, and a family name is always taken from the first name genus in that family. And the oldest genus in that family, as far as, you know, the one that has had a name given to it by humans for the longest time, is asparagus, which isn't surprising, because the culinary asparagus have been cultivated for thousands of years in the classic world, around the Mediterranean. So the genus Asparagus gives its name to this family name, which is Asparagaceae. All family names end in the suffix -aca, A-C-A-E-A. I think I might have spelled it correctly. if you pay at all attention to the classification of plants, you know that a lot of plants have new scientific names. And I do use the term scientific name instead of Latin name because so many plant names, probably animal names as well, are not classical Latin. Asparagus, I'm sure, being a plant that's been cultivated for thousands of years, is probably the ancient common name for the genus. And you know, so many plant names they're named to commemorate people or after the location where they were originally described. And so many plant names are not Latin, which is why I think scientific name is a more useful term. So why have so many of these families gotten reorganized? So many of the members of the asparagus family used to be in the lily family. And now that lily family has been sliced and diced and reordered and shuffled around, there have been a lot of changes over the last few decades where there were a family for a few years and then that family disappeared and they got merged into another family and this and that. Well, I need to go back one step and talk about how plants were classified in classical taxonomy, and that was by morphology, morph referring to body, you know, the actual physical presence of an organism. So when plants were classified by morphology, it was characteristics that we could see with our eyes, not with a microscope and stuff. So the lily family was characterized by whorls of three, floral whorls of three. And in the lily family, the sepals and the petals look very similar one to the other. And because they're all petal-like, they are given a term tepal, which is just petal with the letters shifted around. But in a lot of plants, the sepals, the outermost whorl, are much more like leaves than they are in the lily family. So you have the three outer tepals, which are technically the modified sepals. And then you have the three inner petals, the three inner tepals, which are the actual petals. And then you have, I don't know how uniform, but in a lot of the lily family, have 6 stamens, the male part of the flower that bears the pollen, and the pistil. You know, there's the old joke, don't move, I have a pistil. And the lily family was also characterized in that the ovary was superior, which in a botanical sense, it does not mean better, it just means it's above the outer whorls. And so in a lily, the ovary was above the petals, which were above the sepals, whereas in something like a crinum, which is in the amaryllis family, the ovary is all the way, is inferior, it's below the other whorls of the flower. But we don't use morphology all that much nowadays for classification of plants, and I assume other organisms. DNA, the actual gene sequence, and other chromosome data and chemistry of the plant is what informs most of the classification. And so you have plants that look morphologically quite different, that the DNA information says, no, they're actually quite closely related. And of course, the opposite happens as well, where plants that look very similar morphologically are actually very different when you look at their DNA. So, you know, you don't walk into a garden and look at the DNA of a plant. So we just sort of have to learn what the different families are. I've always been interested in the classification of plants. I think from a practical standpoint, it's maybe more interesting than important to know the families that plants belong to. They don't necessarily tell you a whole lot about the plant as far as, how to use it in the garden or how to cultivate it. Because even if you look at a single genus, like the iris genus, all right, well, all the iris are in one genus, but you don't really know how to grow any of those until you go down to the individual species level, because in the iris genus, you have some that prefer to grow in standing water and others that must be absolutely bone dry all summer long when they're dormant. So, to know that plants are related, it doesn't always help you understand how to grow them, because closely related species might need very different cultural requirements. So the new family, the asparagus family, includes includes a great diversity of plants. It's almost 3,000 species in about 114 genera. Asparagus family. In the asparagus family, the genus Asparagus is just one, but then there's more than 100 other genera in that family. So it's a big family. Some of them are pretty odd, obscure plants. A few of them are important, culinary plants, especially the several species of asparagus, but many, many very highly valued ornamental plants. So where do we go from here? Well, we could start talking about the asparagus family, not the asparagus family, the genus Asparagus. And I met an asparagus species for the very first time just this very afternoon. The genus Asparagus includes about 300 species. They're all Old World species, native from Siberia to South Africa. So you might imagine with that range, they range from things that are very cold hardy to things that are tropical. Some of the tropicals are common houseplants. But you also have to imagine with 300 species, there are a lot that we're probably not growing at this time. Now, someone might say, well, I've seen asparagus growing in the wild along the roadsides in this area. Well, yes, that's entirely possible, because the culinary asparagus, Asparagus officinalis, is naturalized in this country. Naturalized meaning a plant that is not native, or otherwise the term is exotic, but has escaped to the wild and is now, seemingly a permanent part of our flora, though it wasn't native there originally. And this is not exactly the culinary asparagus, but it's a really close relative, Asparagus brachyphyllus. And asparagus are dioecious in that the plants are either male or female. You might be able to see on this asparagus these green fruit. So this is clearly a female plant. So in order to get fruit, you need both male and female. And I use the term fruit from a botanical standpoint, meaning that part of the plant that bears the seed. And fruit include both edible and poisonous fruit. It's just the part of the plant that bears the seed. I don't imagine any asparagus fruit is poisonous, but I don't recommend eating anything until you're sure it's edible. But this, you can see the bottom of the stem does look very much like the asparagus you had this spring, but then it quickly grows to a 6-foot tall plant, either male or female. For production purposes, male plants are preferred because they don't put any energy into fruit production. And when you have both male and female plants, you will get a lot of fruit production. The Arboretum has quite a few species of asparagus that are being grown primarily as ornamentals. Yeah, and the ones that I've seen with mature fruit, the fruit is very often red, but some species have black fruit. I don't know if there's a wider range of colors than that. But I should add, this one, Asparagus brachyphyllus, is entirely edible when the shoots are young and tender. And some of you probably are fans of the public radio program Splendid Table, when Lynn Rosetta Caspar was the host. And she was, absolutely delightful person to listen to and very knowledgeable. But I always was disappointed that she insisted that those skinny little asparagus spears you might find in the grocery store were more tender than the great big ones. It's not the case, because those great big ones are growing on a robust plant with plenty of, really good growing conditions. So those big, thick ones are usually the more tender ones, because they're nice and lush and plump. But anyhow, and there's a number of other asparagus we grow that, we'll often try the spears, and some are really tasty. I meant to look up the name of the one that's in the bulb border up by the rooftop garden, because it's really delicious, but I forgot to look up that name. Some asparagus, like the culinary ones, are upright, self-supporting plants. Others are climbers. This one didn't have anything to climb, so it's just sort of sprawling along the ground, but it will climb. A few of them twine, some of them just sort of weave their way into, a shrub or some other support. This is Asparagus acutefolius, which has nothing to do with being cute, but rather sharp, like an acute angle. And it is fairly prickly. Some of the asparagus are fairly prickly. Well, I'm going to say foliage, but none of this is truly foliage. Chris might help me out on this.
I don't know. I think that plant's so weird. I'm not too sure if I know what the structure is.
Well,
are those stems? Are they leaves? Are they somewhere in between?
Yeah, there's a number of members of the asparagus family that seem to, over the millennia, and I wasn't watching when it happened, lost their foliage. And so what they have now are modified stems playing the role of foliage, as in this butcher's broom.
Which is weird, because leaves are a modified stem to begin with. Just modified them, made a leaf, then got rid of the leaf, and then did something different.
Yeah, it's really weird. I don't quite understand. I'll have to time travel to the past and watch it happen or something. But this is a fairly attractive one. And Plant Delight's nursery in eastern Wake County has some incredibly beautiful asparagus in their collection. This is Asparagus springeri, which is the one that's the real common hanging basket plant, or at least used to be really common. But this is a selection that's winter hardy, and it's in full bloom. You see the flowers are quite tiny. And I suspect they have the 6 tepals of lilies, and we're not talking about the lily family, but those families are closely allied. Yeah, it has 6 tiny little white tepals and little stamens. So I guess this is a male plant. And this is, Lordy, I was going to remember the name. Asparagus. Oh, which one is this? This is one that I really like because it's attractive for the whole growing season, well into the winter even. And this is about full size and upright. It's in Oak Grove, right by the Chatalpa, right on the edge of the bed. Lordy. Chris is going into FileMaker, the Arboretum's incredible record of everything in the nursery and in the ground at the Arboretum over all of time. So
aren't the beds OG?
Yeah, OG. Yeah, if you mention the name, I'll immediately recognize it because I studied the name when I cut that stem a little while ago. But I showed you this asparagus a few minutes ago. This is Asparagus filicinus, Filicinus, and it's one that Mark brought back to the Arboretum just this morning. I hadn't ever seen this species before, and when I picked it up, I didn't know if I was looking at a conifer, something like a arborvitae with broad, flat leaves. But then I saw the fruit on it, and I thought, well, that looks more like asparagus fruit, and it is indeed an asparagus. It's a species native to Asia, very widespread. Part of its range includes India and China. And what I learned about its history here at the Arboretum is that Mark brought back, I assume, seeds of it years ago. The plants at the Arboretum were lost, but he was able to get a plant of it back from somebody he shared the plant with years ago. And so, again, a good example of the importance of sharing things. So when you lose a plant, you might be able to get it back from somebody else.
So going back a little bit, Doug, was that Asparagus virgatus?
Yes. Yeah, this is Asparagus virgatus, Virgatus. And it doesn't, I think most of our plants must be male because there's never many fruit on them, but we did collect enough seed one year to start it from seed. The asparagus are quite easy from seed. Going on to a fairly closely related genus in the asparagus family are Ruscus. Here are two different species. This is Ruscus aculeatus, not the typical form, but a narrow-leaf form. And again, technically, they're not true leaves. And the Ruscus aculeatus, again, that acute prefix meaning sharp, and they are quite sharp. One of the common names, and it's a European native, so there are a lot of common names that we are aware of. One of the common names is knee holly because it gets about knee to waist high, and it's real pokey, so you're going to get poked in the knees. But the other name is butcher's broom, and I think that it was probably used to scour a butcher's block, which was done periodically, I guess, to...
I saw those at was it the governor's mansion over in New Bern? In the kitchen that's off to the left side, they had the butcher's broom just on top of the counter.
Oh, for use in the kitchen?
Yeah, so they do use that to scrape the counters.
Yeah, scrape when you're butchering meat, every day on a butcher's block, I'm sure a bunch of fat and stuff accumulates. Anyone who's a vegetarian out there can cover their ears right now. But I remember as a kid, which was pre-plastic, butcher's broom was sold at Christmas time, usually painted red or white, because this is as tough as plastic and certainly would dry looking exactly like this other than turning brown when it dried. Now, this is Ruscus. This one used to be called hypoglossum, but is now thought to be a hybrid. And it's, again, these are plants that don't have true leaves, but have modified stems that look like true leaves. And it actually blooms right in the middle of this pseudo-leaf. They're no longer in bloom, but they did have a little flower there. And the Ruscus are like the asparagus in that they're dioecious, meaning they're either male or female. Dioecious as opposed to monoecious, di being two and mono one, meaning one home or two homes. So a plant is either male or female. And on Ruscus aculeatus, they make a big pea-sized red fruit that persists all winter. This narrow-leaf form is actually one that Elizabeth Lawrence acquired from a nurseryman in England, many, many decades ago. And I think it might have been the only time that a narrow-leaf form was introduced. And it's a male, so we don't ever get fruit on it. But the butcher's brooms are really good evergreen plants for a shade garden and very tolerant of dry shade. Also useful for controlling foot traffic because they are so pokey. they will keep people from cutting a corner too tight.
Doug, while you're
Yes.
talking about male and female in the group, someone asked earlier about the asparagus. Are the male and female equal when it comes to the eating purposes? Or are the edible ones male, or are they female? I think they might be just one is preferred.
I think the eating quality is probably identical.
Okay.
But what I do know
I thought one had bigger spears.
well, what I do know
Okay, sorry.
is that male plants are preferred when one is growing asparagus for the kitchen, because the females, you can see on this little asparagus plant, that's quite a few fruit. This plant, being a female, is putting a lot of energy into producing this fruit, which will mean it's spending less energy producing big juicy spears. So male plants are preferred. I know, the Rutgers University does a fair amount of asparagus breeding, because asparagus is a big crop in the truck farms in South Jersey. And, one of their selections is Jersey Night, which I presume is a predominantly male seed strain. Yeah, so, somebody, a food snob probably could tell you they could taste the difference between a male asparagus and a female asparagus, but just like when real people taste wines, they can't distinguish between what's thought to be a good wine or a bad wine. I suspect nobody can really tell the difference in taste between a male or a female asparagus. It's just that the males are more productive. All right. So we're not going to talk about all 114 genera in the asparagus family, but several other families, several other genera of note. The agaves are in that family. It's hard, morphologically, it's hard to, imagine that these are in the same family, but they are. Though the one thing I should add is that even with classical classification, classical taxonomy, the focus of classification was on the flowers, because the stems and the leaves of the plant might become very different depending on the conditions they grow under in their native habitat. And so succulents in an agave, or yucca or dasylirion, which are also in the asparagus family, is a response to an arid climate. And something like this asparagus is growing in probably a mesic environment, not a xeric environment, and so it doesn't have to develop succulents. So the body of a plant might change based on where it's living and where it evolved, but the flowers don't change very much. So when classical taxonomy was based on the morphology of a plant, it was primarily focused on the floral parts, because they didn't change all that much. And I've grown both snake plants and dracaenas, and their flowers are also tiny little flowers in great big sprays. And so even though the plants are quite different, the inflorescences are pretty
So you said
similar.
they look a little bit different, but I think if you use your imagination a little bit, you can see some similarities. Like a flower stalk on a hosta, before it's flowering, does look a little bit similar to an agave stalk. Obviously, major size difference, which looks rather similar to an asparagus shoot coming up out of the ground. So loosely similar,
Yeah.
but very dissimilar, as you said.
Yeah, well, and nowadays taxonomy is based on the chromosomes and not what our eyes see. Well, and we met a lot of agaves and their close relatives on the plant walk this month, and it's a big genus, all native to the New World, and it just like the asparagus that have a wide range. The agaves range from tropical areas to very cold and areas like the upper Midwest. And the ones that are winter hardy in zone 7 make really good garden plants. There are a group of plants that doesn't have to have dry because they will make use of moisture whenever it's available, but they will tolerate, of course, extended periods of drought. And maybe we'll jump to the hostas, because some people have speculated now that taxonomists are saying that hostas and agaves are fairly closely related, that they could be hybridized. I'm not sure what sort of chimera you come up with, like hostas with vicious thorns on the tips of the leaves, or agave that's herbaceous. I don't know.
It might be deer-proof. They might bite back.
Well, that's a thought, yeah. The deer goes for the hosta and then discovers it has vicious thorns along the edge of the leaf. The thorns on a rose never kept a deer from eating it. And, mention that edible plants in the asparagus family, but various different agaves are, we all know, I never pronounced the word correct, tequila and mezcal are all ferments made from various species of agave, but young shoots are also sometimes eaten. And, they're closely related. Yucca, the flowers are often eaten on yuccas. And in Asia, there are some hostas that are cultivated as vegetables. I think it involves some, blanching the new growth in the spring, so it's very tender. But, it's not a plant we tend to eat here in the U.S., but it's something you can buy in a grocery store in Japan. All right. And the family also includes rhodias and aspidistras and their close relatives. Both excellent plants for the shade garden. What else can I say about them? They're both Asian. They're both native to Asia. There's only the genus Rhodia is fairly small, but it seems like every day there's new aspidistras introduced to horticulture. And I don't mean strictly new cultivar, but just species we weren't aware of in the past. The flowers of aspidistra seem fairly different from many members of this family in that they're at ground level and look more like the mushrooms called earth stars than the flowers of other members of the family. Rhodias are in bloom now. It's a sort of like a toadstool size, sort of like a toadstool when it first comes up before the cap opens up flat. It's sort of like a fat little stocky drumstick of tanned flowers, not very showy, but they are replaced by bright red fruit that persist all winter. The sansevierias, this is a plant I've known my whole life, and this cultivar actually was introduced in the 1800s. And at one point I had my grandfather's plant, which is why I said I grew up with it, because he always had it. And though I don't have the plant directly from him, it would be exactly the same clone. So in some ways I still have it. But recently taxonomists have decided that the two genera, the Sansevierias or Sansevierias and Dracaenas, need to be lumped all into Dracaena. So if you you didn't know that?
I think I've heard it, but it's always a shocker.
Yeah, well, and if you go online, already on, just common things you Google, they'll often have the snake plants under both genera at this point.
Some things just seem wrong, and that's one of them.
Well, yeah, and, there is that Dracaena, tell me again how it's pronounced, the one that's spelled T-I? Is that Thai or T?
there's T, but is that a Dracaena?
Yeah. Oh, or is it a cordyline?
I think it's a cordyline.
All right. Well, cordylines are very, very closely related to
It was lumped into
Dracaenas.
Dracaena too, right?
What?
I said it was lumped into Dracaena too.
Probably. You know, the local nurseryman had thought, well, if you cross those tea plants with the bright, you know, the most common one you see is the bright fuchsia pink leaves, often used as a summer bedding plant. If you could cross those with Dracaenas and have a plant like this with, you know, shocking fuchsia pink leaves or something.
So some people might call those Hawaiian tea. It's just TI.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce TI. I'm pretty sure there's only one syllable, but you never know. So what else can I say about the asparagus family? Are there questions on the asparagus family?
Well, so far the one question we had was about the male and female one. I did find on the internet that the male has larger stems.
Okay.
So your lady chef probably liked the female ones because they were skinny.
Well, no, I just assume, I think people tend to assume that, you know, the slender ones are delicate little baby ones, but no, they're not. They're puny ones, and they might be from plants that were being poorly grown, and so they're tough from hard growing conditions.
And I found it kind of interesting that there's a seed strain that makes male. Because I have no clue what makes a plant a male or a female other than what it looks like. Like we have a Y and X chromosome that does all the magic, but plants don't have that chromosome. So what is it that does it? So there's...
Well, maybe line breeding, where, you know, you have two the same parents each time, and you know what the offspring are. You know, a lot of plant breeding nowadays is to produce sterile forms of exotic plants that have the potential of being invasive exotics, so they don't any longer have the ability to produce seedlings. That's certainly true in Buddleia.
Yep.
We have a alternative to the Bradford pear, which the breeder Dr. Tom Rainey here at NC State doesn't like to call sterile, but his preferred term is highly infertile because it doesn't make fruit. Yeah.
Well, how about if I just add one little fun thing that I like about the Sansevieria? The green part is diploid, and the variegated part is tetraploid, and you can feel a thickness and change if you just rub your fingers across them. It's thicker on the outside. And I always thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Not really about the asparagus family.
Well, and you know, the snake plants are a genus of plant that can be propagated from leaf cuttings, but the variegated one will only produce unvariegated plants because that yellow margin isn't able to produce plantlets. I don't know if that's connected to being tetraploid or to being lacking chlorophyll.
It's the layer system in there.
Yeah,
It has 3 layers. So we might have a chef in the group. Mitzi says that the trick for the asparagus is to use a vegetable peeler to make the asparagus a little bit softer.
Okay. Does that also turn a female into a male?
Not to turn it into a male. It kind of sounded like it would, but no. That's just to make it a little bit softer. So I guess the outside, that's a little bit tough. And Penelope agrees that the thicker asparagus is better. So you two can go have some asparagus together and enjoy the thicker ones.
Okay.
And she says her dad grew up with asparagus, and she would see some thicker ones coming out of the ground. So those are always her favorites. Let's try to get a question. Someone's asking, and it keeps on moving, sorry. Why do my real asparagus not make real spears very outer for years? I don't know what it is. I'm going to interpret it that she's asking why is hers not making a lot of spears quickly, and this is a crop that you have to establish for a number of years. I don't think you're supposed to harvest any asparagus for about 3 years.
It's about like that, yeah. You know, they're real puny plants when you start them.
Yep. Yeah,
and you know, you're better off harvesting not at all or very lightly the first few years so they can build up strength. You know, if she doesn't have good growing conditions, they might not ever produce a lot of spears. Full sun and you know, a lot of home gardeners, they might have a spot that has a few hours of sun, so it's not quite enough, or they're close to some big trees that suck all the moisture out of the ground.
Yeah, I grew one ornamentally just to have the light, airy, frilly thing. And it was south-facing in the forest, but it was shaded. And I think I only ever got 2 shoots out of it. It had to be in the ground for 10 years. But it did what I wanted. It wasn't in a vegetable garden with full sun.
Yeah.
So I got what I enjoyed. So I'll just share a little fun story. Lisa and I were talking about the asparagus ferns earlier, and I've long enjoyed the one called foxtail. I think that one's a beautiful fern. Maybe not hardy enough here, but can live through some winters. But I keep mine in a pot and just bring it into the garage over the wintertime. I don't like having them inside the house because all those little leaves fall off and they turn into a vacuuming disaster. So I just keep it in the garage near a window, and it's fine. But I call mine Sideshow Bob for all of you Simpsons fans out there, because it looks like Sideshow Bob's hair. And I love that one. Sandy agrees. She says yes to the foxtail ferns. I think that's a beautiful one. It's weird. I've never been a huge fan of the springery fern, but I love foxtail fern, and they're almost the same thing. It's just more congested.
I meant to cut a stem, but it's sort of like a bottle brush arrangement of foliage.
Yep.
I always think they look like underwater vegetation. Need to put some ceramic fish up above them.
And the person came back with the asparagus and the spears. She says they're getting about 10 hours of sun at this time of the year, and just the general area of rest of her garden. So it seems like it just might be a lot of time. Is this one that I remember reading that you're supposed to plant it with a lot of organic matter as well?
They're heavy feeders. Yeah. You want them to be growing real quickly and strongly.
Yeah. I seem to remember planting being recommended with a lot of organic matter for asparagus. I'm not a professional when it comes to planting asparagus, but I seem to remember reading that one many years ago. Okay, okay, she did say that she's a new person with the 10 hours of sun, so maybe the asparagus is also new. So it's one of those perennial crops. You just have to wait a while. It's like rhubarb. Well, not rhubarb in this area, because that's just not recommended at all. Yeah, I've heard a few people with success, but not too many. Plant it, enjoy it in a few years, and lightly harvest it when you first start, and then many years later you can be harvesting it even multiple times in one season. Yeah, she or he doesn't indicate how long her asparagus have been planted. So not how long, but she said she was a new person with 10 hours of sun. So kind of sounds like it might be a little bit earlier. Oh, she asked, I guess she's an add-on, so this was a new person. Sorry about that. Yeah. Well, if it's a new planting of asparagus, that's why they're not producing a lot of spears. Yeah. But, grow them really well this summer, and they'll be very much bigger next year. Mm-hmm. So I think that takes care of the questions, because no one's adding in anything else for the whole entire family. You showed a bunch of cool plants up here, and you've just piqued everyone's interest with asparagus. Yeah. that was not the reason for today's topic. I wanted to show how diverse the family was, because it's a pretty cool family. Yeah. I put a link in the chat to the Wikipedia page that lists all the subfamilies. I hope you take a look at that, because just the subfamily list is huge. Yeah. There are families out there that don't have that many species in the family. And these are the subspecies that have species in them. It's a huge family. A lot of really cool plants in there. A lot of them ornamental. And as taxonomists have shifted things around, some of these subfamilies used to be families. Like one of the subfamilies is the Agavoideae. All the subfamilies end in EAE. Not that many years ago, there was the agave family, the Asparagaceae, but now that's lumped in with the asparagus. And I think wasn't the Scilla family? Wasn't there a Scilla family? I don't remember that one. I remember agave, and I think Nolina having their own family.
Nolina was a family. Now that's just a subfamily. Yep. For today, these are sort of the classification du jour. So it's kind of neat that the asparagus family was split from another family, but then other previous families joined it. Yeah. It was a little bit of both. We did just have a question in here. This one's from Vandy, Doug. She was wondering, do you cut Ruscus down every winter? No. Ruscus and Aspidistra, and, these are, well, it doesn't matter what they are. And I meant to grab Danae. Danae is another genus very similar to Ruscus. the stems live for about 3 years, or maybe, towards the end of their third year, these individual stems will die of old age. And so what I do late winter or anytime, some of the stems are getting shabby is just cut out those stems. I think if you cut the whole plant to the ground every year, it would weaken the plant over a number of years, and it probably wouldn't ever, be as robust as it could be. So I just cut out the oldest leaves or stems that are starting to go by. The moment they start to turn yellow, provided the whole plant's not turning yellow, if the rest of the plant looks healthy, any of the individual leaves or stems that are turning yellow, we cut out at that point. And certainly Aspidistra. Aspidistra used to be less reliable in this zone 7 when we used to have real normal cold zone 7 winters. And if they got cut to the ground, they'd always regrow, but they'd be sort of puny for a number of years until they built up strength. So I would just cut out the individual leaves that are shabby, but leave as much as you can. That was a good question. Thank you, Vandy.
We did learn an interesting fact from Judith at Pine Knot Farms. She recommends cutting back the old foliage on Aspidistra after the new foliage has already grown up. Because with the Aspidistras, you want to have the foliage nice and large. This looks more tropical that way. And if you cut the old foliage first and then the new ones grow, then they are shorter. They're taller if you leave the old foliage and shorter if you cut the new foliage or cut the old foliage off, excuse me. That was a little trick that she uses.
Yeah. One of my favorite people in the entire world.
Yep. So we did have a couple more questions. See if I can hunt them down.
Sure.
And this is going back to Angela. So she did post that her plants are really new for the asparagus and they're just little tiny sprigs. Yeah, Angela, you need to wait for it. Again, I think it's 3 years for your first harvest, and that harvest probably won't be all that much.
Pamper them this year.
Yeah, pamper them and get them going. I think moisture likers and organic matter for most of them.
Well, and based on what our soil test shows, give them fertilizer.
And
we often worry about giving plants, vegetables, too much nitrogen because they'll make a lot of foliage and not fruit. But, that's exactly what you want on an asparagus. We don't care anything about the fruit. We want lots of vegetative growth.
So Jennifer has a question. She says, do you cut down the asparagus ferns that are not actually spears ready to harvest for eating? And I think what may not be clear on this one is that the spears eventually turn into the parts with what look like leaves, but really aren't leaves.
Yeah, no, I agree with your assessment of that question. If you don't cut the spears, they grow up into the 6-foot-tall stem, that highly branched with the tiny little pseudo leaves. So every spear you leave on an asparagus will turn into one of these. Read up on asparagus. I don't know at what point you stop harvesting them. You don't harvest them all summer long because the plant needs this kind of growth in order to make food to pack away in the big roots underground. So it has lots of spears next year. Probably after, I don't know, maybe a month of harvesting, you need to stop.
It's not long. You can't keep it up. If you keep it up, you're not going to have the top growth that's photosynthesizing and making sugars. You need to have it. I think it's a matter of 2 or 3 harvests at most.
Okay.
I don't think it's a whole lot. Keep in mind that we're both ornamental horticulturalists, not vegetable growers.
Yeah.
That's just a few things I remember from vegetables class, and boy, that was a good number of years ago now. But you don't harvest it. I think it's just a matter of a few weeks, maybe upwards of a month, 2 or 3 harvests at most is what you can do for that one. I think we had another one in here that I wanted to find.
All right, while you're looking for it, I'll add that a couple other members of the family are Liriope and Ophiopogon. But the family also includes a lot of spring blooming flowering bulbs like the Scillas and Pushkinia. And the bluebells, not Virginia bluebell, but the bluebells, like Spanish bluebells and the English bluebells. And did you find the question?
We did. We had just a nice question from Mitzi. She's just wondering if there are any pest problems within this family.
Meaning, are
Deer
they
and hostas don't go together real well.
well?
The deer think they're wonderful.
Is the question, is the family bothered by pests, or do some of these plants become pests?
Some families, some genera, some species are just really notorious for getting problems. Rose family.
Yeah, the rose family is a nightmare. But most of these plants we grow and don't usually have regular problems.
Yep.
You know, yuccas, some years and sometimes for year after year, yuccas get yucca bugs.
Yeah.
And the foliage is hideous then.
I've seen those yucca bugs, and boy, they really are in large numbers, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not fun. But I've had the Sansevieria, for instance. That was my mother's first houseplant she ever purchased when they first got married. So that was over 50 years ago, and I don't think it's ever had a single insect problem in that entire time.
No.
I've never had an insect problem on a hosta before that I can remember. Deer, yes.
Yeah.
But and voles underground, but never an insect problem. And never had an insect problem on Aspidistra. Never had an insect or a disease problem on agaves.
Rhodias, we do have a, I think it's a bacterial blight. But, but the way we deal with it is strip off all the old leaves, because then the new foliage generally stays clean for most of the growing season or all of the growing season.
Well, that's easy enough, isn't it?
It's easy enough.
That takes care of that problem. So they're a relatively easy plant to garden with, so that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that does take care of all the questions in the chat. So thank you very much, Doug, for a great presentation. And thanks to Blake and Lise for helping out with the recording. If no one's seen Lise before, that's her behind me. She usually helps out behind the camera, but we're over here trying to train Blake, so they swapped off just a little while ago. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're very happy to have you here every single week here at the Arboretum. Hope you can join us next week for a great review of the Xeric Garden Plant Lovers Tour. We'll see you then on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Have a great week. Bye, everyone.